What's up, everyone? It's Ray from EverydayRay, and today we're on an epic adventure right here in Dayton, Ohio. We're starting at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, the largest aviation museum in the world. If you love history and massive planes, this place is about to blow your mind. We've got over 350 aircraft, missiles, and thousands of artifacts spread over huge indoor galleries. And the best part? It's completely free to visit. Stick around because we're walking through the highlights, coolest exhibits, and pro tips so you can make the most of your day. The museum is on Paterson Air Force Base, right in the heart of aviation history, near where the Wright brothers worked. After you enter the front gate, it's a short drive to the main museum sign, and you continue to the main parking area. Parking is free and huge, which is perfect because this place is enormous. The museum opens at 9 a.m. and closes at 5 p.m. every day. Admission is free, which is incredible for what you get. Plan at least 3 to 5 hours for your visit. I'd plan for a full day or more if you want to try and see everything without rushing, because there's so much to see. Quick heads up, there's a security check similar to an airport, so leave big bags in the car if you can. No food or drinks inside the main galleries, but there's a cafeteria and outdoor areas. First up, the Early Years Gallery. This takes you right back to the dawn of flight. You can see replicas and originals from the Wright brothers era through World War I, including early biplanes and trainers. Here is the Wright 1909 military flyer. It became the first military heavier-than-air flying machine. You probably know that Wilbur and Orville Wright dedicated themselves to solving the mystery of heavier-than-air powered flight. The National Museum of the United States Air Force is within 7 miles of the places where they lived, studied, and solved the mysteries of flight. In 1911, the U.S. Army Signal Corps purchased the second airplane, a Curtiss Model D. The Model D was a pusher, meaning the rear-mounted propeller pushed the aircraft. Next up, the SPAD 7. The SPAD 7 made its initial flight in July 1916 and showed such promise that it was put into production at once. The airplane was an immediate success, primarily because its structural ruggedness permitted it to dive at high speeds without disintegrating. But this is one of my favorites, the Sopwith Camel. It had unmatched maneuverability and was difficult to defeat in a dogfight. But for me, it brings back memories of Snoopy in the Peanuts cartoon, where he got on top of his doghouse pretending he was a World War I flying ace battling the Red Baron. This wind tunnel was designed by Orville Wright and installed in his laboratory in Dayton, Ohio. He used this tunnel to conduct various aerodynamic experiments during the World War I period. Here's another very early wind tunnel, the McCook Field Wind Tunnel. This wind tunnel was designed and built at McCook Field in Ohio in 1918. Using a 24-blade fan with 60 inches of diameter, the tunnel developed a maximum airspeed of 453 miles per hour. It was used for calibrating airspeed instruments and testing airfoils. The item to be evaluated was placed in the choke throat and viewed through a glass door. During operation, the air was drawn into the small end of the tunnel and exhausted from the large end, where the fan was located. Then there's the war pigeon exhibit, commonly referred to as homing pigeons or carrier pigeons. They were bred and trained to carry messages in military operations. Due to their speed, endurance, altitude, and homing ability, pigeons were frequently used as military messengers because they were often more reliable and difficult to intercept than other forms of wartime communication. The U.S. Army Air Service used the standard J-1 during World War I for primary flight instruction. Here, the fabric covering of the fuselage has been removed to illustrate the wire-braced wooden construction typical for an aircraft of that time. During World War I, Italian aeronautical engineer Gianni Caproni developed a series of multi-engine heavy bombers that played a key role in the Allied strategic bombing campaign. In late 1914, Caproni designed the CA-31, powered by 3 rotary engines. Toward the end of the war, the definitive version, the CA-36, went into production and remained in the Italian Air Force as late as 1929. The Allies used thousands of Model T cars and trucks because of their low cost and ease of repair. The ambulance versions, lightweight, made it well suited for use on muddy and shell-torn roads in forward combat areas. If stuck in a hole, a group of soldiers could lift one without much difficulty. Here is the Martin MB-2, the first U.S.-designed bomber produced in large numbers. First ordered in June 1920, it replaced a handful of British and Italian Caproni bombers produced in the United States under license during World War I. Designed as a night bomber, the MB-2 sacrificed speed and maneuverability to carry a heavy bomb load. As aircraft engines gained in power and size, the difficulty and danger involved in starting an engine by swinging the prop increased dramatically, and so came the idea of developing a mechanical means of starting an aircraft engine. Truck-mounted aircraft engine starters became popular. Before World War II, aeronautical engineers sought to build an aircraft capable of making short takeoffs and landings. Eventually, their efforts produced a helicopter, but they also pursued a less common design, the autogyro. The B-10, the first modern all-metal monoplane bomber produced in quantity, featured retractable landing gear, a rotating gun turret, and enclosed cockpits. Its advanced design made it 50% faster than biplane bombers, and as fast as most of the fighters. It was called the air power wonder of its day. Here's a few more planes in the gallery. So, that wraps up the early years. Now we're heading into the massive World War II section. It begins with a display about the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, when the U.S. Pacific Fleet was caught by surprise by an Imperial Japanese Navy task force. The display shows how a small group of pilots rushed to their planes and took to the sky in defense of the naval station at Kaneohe Bay. The Mitsubishi Zero was the Allies' main opponent in the Pacific Air War. The Zero is the most famous symbol of Japanese air power during World War II. The fighter first flew in April 1939, and 10,815 Zeros were produced, a greater number than any other aircraft. Its distinctive design and historical impact make the Zero an important machine in air power history. The best fighter available in large numbers when World War II began was the P-40. P-40s engaged the Japanese aircraft at Pearl Harbor and in the Philippines in December 1941. They also served with the famed Flying Tigers in China in 1942 and in North Africa in 1943. The B-29 medium bomber was one of America's most famous airplanes in World War II. B-29 saw duty in every combat area being flown. Although the airplane was originally intended for level bombing from medium altitudes, it was used extensively in the Pacific Theater for bombing Japanese airfields and beach emplacements from treetop level. The Supermarine Spitfire was the iconic defender of Britain and one of the most elegant, adaptable fighters of the war. It symbolized Allied resilience, especially in the Battle of Britain. The B-17 Flying Fortress flew in every combat zone during World War II, but its most significant service was over Europe. Along with the B-24 Liberator, the B-17 formed the backbone of the U.S. Air Force Strategic Bombing Force, and it helped win the war by crippling Germany's war industry. The B-17's design emphasized high-altitude flight, speed, and heavy defensive armament in order to survive enemy defenses. There are German planes too. Here's a Stork Fiesler, widely used during World War II by German military forces for reconnaissance, liaison, and aeromedical transport. High-ranking officers also used it as personal transport. It was notable for good maneuverability and excellent takeoff and landing characteristics. Then there's the Messerschmitt Bf-109. During World War II, the Bf-109 was the backbone of the Luftwaffe fighter force, serving on all fronts. Production actually rose until the closing months of the war, and it remained the most numerous Luftwaffe fighter. Also of note is the Messerschmitt Me-262. Developed from 1938 design by the Messerschmitt Company, the 262 was the world's first operational turbojet aircraft. First flown under jet power on July 18, 1942, it proved much faster than conventional airplanes. The 262 became the first jet airplane used in combat. As a fighter, the German jet scored heavily against Allied bomber formations. U.S. Army Air Force bombers, however, destroyed hundreds of 262s on the ground, and fewer than 300 saw combat. Here's a look at a few more World War II planes, each with a history worth exploring. The North American P-51D Mustang was the decisive long-range escort fighter. Its range, high-altitude performance, speed, and maneuverability allowed it to escort bombers deep into Germany, achieving air superiority over the Luftwaffe, and is widely regarded as one of the best piston-engine fighters ever built. But one of the most important Air Force planes of World War II was the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. The B-29 on display, boxcar, dropped the Fat Man atomic bomb on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, 3 days after the atomic attack against Hiroshima. Boxcar was one of 15 specially modified Silverplate B-29s. Silverplates had almost all their machine guns taken out and armor removed to save weight so that the heavy atomic bombs of the time could be carried over a longer distance. U.S. Army Air Force's leadership committed the Superfortress to Asia, where its great range made it particularly suited for the long, overwater flights against the Japanese homeland from bases in China. Boxcar was flown to the museum on September 26, 1961. But before I continue with the other galleries, the absolute highlight of my visit relates to the B-29. I was here when this historic restored B-29 Superfortress flew in, one of the only of a couple still airworthy in the world. I got footage of it landing right here at the museum. Check this out. Just look at that beauty. This is why I love exploring. You never know when you'll witness something this cool. After the plane landed, they towed it to the gate. I was lucky enough to check it out, and after a short wait online, I got a tour. The B-29 wasn't just big, it was a major technological leap, often called the most advanced bomber of the war, and the pinnacle of piston-engine bomber design. It was developed as a very heavy long-range bomber, specifically for the vast Pacific theater. Key innovations included pressurized crew compartments, a first for a bomber, allowing high-altitude flight in relative comfort without constant oxygen masks. Remote-controlled gun turrets with a central fire control system used analog computers, which helped the gunners. Standing inside this piece of history was unreal. You feel the weight of what these crews did. Here's the interior crew tunnel, which airmen used to get from the front and back of the plane. And this is the navigation station. Here's the radio communication station, right behind the pilots. The B-29 combined size, range, altitude, payload, and cutting-edge tech in a way no other World War II bomber matched. After the tour, I walked around the back end of the plane to check everything out. Here are engines on the other side, and a gun turret under the fuselage. There's another turret at the tail. On the opposite side is an access door, and a bubble that was sometimes used for special photographic equipment. If you're interested in a tour, check out the link for airpowertour.org in the description box for more information. Now we're going to head back to the museum and the Korean War Gallery. In the Korean Gallery, you see the shift to jets, fighters and bombers from that era. And here's the big one of this gallery, the Douglas C-124 Globemaster II. It's great because visitors are permitted to walk inside this aircraft. C-124s provided heavy airlift during the Korean War and the Southeast Asia War. Other important airlifts conducted by the C-124s included resupply missions to Antarctica, refugee evacuation in the Congo, and mercy flights to Morocco, Chile, and elsewhere throughout the world. To facilitate cargo handling, the C-124, or Old Shaky as it was affectionately known, featured clamshell loading doors and hydraulic ramps in the nose and an elevator under the aft fuselage. It was capable of handling such bulky cargo as tanks, field guns, bulldozers, and trucks. It could also be converted into a transport capable of carrying 200 fully equipped soldiers or 127 patients and their attendants in its double-decked cabin. The Sikorsky UH-19B Chickasaw were often assigned to air rescue squadrons. For rescue service, it carried a 400-pound capacity hoist. During the Korean War, they became the primary United States Air Force rescue and medical evacuation helicopter. Here's another great walkthrough exhibit. This B-29 fuselage is painted to represent Command Decision, a B-29 that became famous for shooting down 5 MiG-15s, unofficially making it a bomber ace. It was named after a popular 1948 film about the difficult decisions and heavy casualties of bomber operations over Europe in World War II. The B-29's complex revolutionary defensive gunnery system featured 5 sighting stations which could selectively fire 4 remote gun turrets and the manned tail turret. The sighting station on display was used on the B-29 Superfortress Command Decision. Here, we enter the nose of the plane where the cockpit would be. The B-29's gunnery system had many advantages over the manned turrets used on nearly all bombers before the B-29. For instance, computers and gyros automatically calculated factors like bullet drop, speed of the B-29, speed of the target, and more. Most importantly, one gunner could aim and fire multiple turrets against a single target. Then we make our way through the bomb bays to the back. During the Korean War, the Douglas B-26 Invader played an important part in the U.S. Air Force's campaign against communist ground forces. Initially, crews flew during the day, but the introduction of the MiG-15 jet fighter forced them to fly most missions at night. The Douglas B-26 was a World War II attack aircraft used for level bombing, ground strafing, and rocket attacks. It made its first flight in July 1942. When production was halted after the war, 2,502 Invaders had been built. The USAF ordered 40 modified B-26Bs with more powerful engines and increased structural strength. Designated the B-26K, these airplanes performed special air warfare missions. The Soviet Union developed the MiG-15 following World War II, and the fighter entered service in 1949. By 1952, the Soviets provided the MiG-15 to a number of communist satellite nations, including North Korea. In 1950, the Soviets began production of a more capable version, the MiG-15 BIS. This used a more powerful engine and hydraulically boosted ailerons. The F-86 Sabre, the U.S. Air Force's first swept-wing jet fighter, made its initial flight in October 1947. The first production of this model flew in May 1948, and 4 months later, an F-86A set a new world speed record of 670.9 miles per hour. As a day fighter, the F-86A saw service in Korea as the primary opponent of the Russian-built MiG-15. Here are other planes and vehicles in the Korean War gallery. But now, let's take a look at the Southeast Asia War Gallery. This is the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress. In June 1965, B-52s entered combat in Southeast Asia. By August 1973, they had flown 126,615 combat sorties, with 17 B-52s lost to enemy action. The B-52 remained the main long-range heavy bomber of the U.S. Air Force during the Cold War, and it continues to be an important part of the United States Air Force bomber force today. Nearly 750 were built before production ended in the fall of 1962. The B-52 has set numerous records in its many years of service. On January 18, 1957, 3 B-52Bs completed their first non-stop round-the-world flight by jet aircraft, lasting 45 hours and 19 minutes and requiring only 3 aerial refuelings. Here is the look-in cockpit display located outside the plane. It's a cockpit simulator which helped airmen learn to operate the B-52G strategic bomber. They could practice takeoffs and landings, fuel management, radio communications, and radar navigation. The trainer simulated realistic instrument indications, the feel of the flight controls, and background sound of a B-52 in flight. This is the General Dynamics F-111A Aardvark. The F-111 was conceived to meet U.S. Air Force requirement for a new tactical fighter bomber. An interesting feature of the aircraft was its variable geometry wings. While in the air, the wings could be swept forward for takeoffs, landings, or slow-speed flight, and swept rearward for high-speed flight. The F-111 could also fly at very low level and hit targets in bad weather. This is the McDonnell Douglas F-4C Phantom II. The Phantom originally was developed for the U.S. Navy fleet defense. The U.S. Air Force's first version, the F-4C, made its first flight in May 1963. In 1965, the USAF sent its first F-4s to Southeast Asia, where they flew air-to-air missions against North Vietnamese fighters, as well as attacking ground targets. The armament loaded on the aircraft on display is a typical configuration for an F-4C in 1967. Here we see the MiG-21, one of the world's most famous jet fighters. This Soviet-made aircraft was a dangerous adversary in the Southeast Asia War. Fast as U.S. jets, it was more agile than the F-4 Phantom, its main opponent. Although American forces lost about 50 aircraft to North Vietnamese MiG-21s, the U.S. Air Force shot down 68 MiG-21s in air combat. United States Air Force Sky Raiders in Southeast Asia are often remembered for their support of search and rescue missions. Operating under the call sign Sandy, the A-1's extended loiter time and massive firepower offered pilots the ability to protect downed airmen for extended periods. Whereas jet aircraft often had to leave the battle area for refueling, the A-1s provided nearly continuous suppressing fire till helicopters extracted the downed airmen. The aircraft on display represents one flown, called the Proud American. The The U.S. Air Force developed the Sikorsky HH-3E helicopter, nicknamed the Jolly Green Giant, to perform combat search and rescue to recover downed airmen during the Southeast Asia War. The HH-3E carried both armor plating and armament to protect it from hostile forces during rescues of aircrews in a combat area. 50 CH-3Es were converted to HH-3Es with the addition of armor, defensive armament, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a rescue hoist. With watertight hull, the HH-3E could land on water, and its large rear door and ramp permitted easy loading and unloading. The first air refuelable helicopter to be produced, the HH-3E's retractable fuel probe and external fuel tanks, gave it a range limited only by the endurance of the aircrew. The UH-1B Iroquois, or Huey, was an iconic symbol of the war. This turbine-powered helicopter revolutionized air-mobile warfare. Thousands served, and it defined helicopter operations for decades. Here are a few more planes used in Southeast Asia. Next is a huge Cold War gallery with stealth tech and more mind-blowing engineering. Here's the Lockheed SR-71A Blackbird, the undisputed Cold War reconnaissance king. Mach 3 plus speeds and extreme altitude made it nearly untouchable. It provided critical intelligence on Soviet and Warsaw Pact forces for decades with zero combat losses. Its mere existence drove massive Soviet investment in air defenses. It was a technological marvel, with titanium construction, exotic fuels. It still holds records. The SR-71 had an interchangeable nose carrying different types of sensors. At Mach 3, special cameras could cover over 100,000 square miles in an hour. The Blackbird flew higher and faster than any plane in existence, while being significantly less visible on radar. Then there's the Lockheed U-2A. This game-changing high-altitude spy plane had early overflights of the USSR. The B-58 Hustler was the world's first operational supersonic bomber. It had Mach 2 dash capability with unique potted weapons and fuel system. It represented a major leap in strategic bombing and forced the Soviets to improve interceptors and surface-to-air missiles. Its speed and altitude performance were impressive for the late 1950s and 60s. The Boeing B-1B Lancer was a late Cold War variable sweep supersonic strategic bomber designed for low-level penetration of Soviet air defenses. It had a massive range, payload, and advanced, for its time, electronic warfare suite. B-1B's blended wing-body configuration, variable geometry design, and turbofan engines combined to provide greater range. Its 3 internal weapons bays could accommodate up to 84 general bombs or naval mines, as well as GPS-guided bombs and more. It's still a backbone today. The F-4 Phantom II was the definitive Western multi-role fighter of the Cold War. It was used across U.S. services and allies, and saw heavy combat in Vietnam and the Middle East. This plane bridged generations of technology, missiles, guns, advanced avionics. Its widespread use and adaptability influenced Soviet designs and NATO tactics for decades. The version here is the RF-4C. It could carry a variety of cameras in its nose section and take photos at both high and low altitude, day or night. This configuration carried no offensive armament. Here's the A-10A Thunderbolt II, a revolutionary close air support platform. Its survivability and lethality shaped modern ground attack doctrine. The A-10 is the first U.S. Air Force aircraft designed specifically for close air support of ground forces. It's very maneuverable at low speeds and low altitudes to ensure accurate weapons delivery, and it carries the systems and armor needed to survive in this environment. It's intended for use against all ground targets, but specifically tanks and other armored vehicles. The Thunderbolt II's great endurance gives it a large combat radius and long loiter time in a battle area. Its short takeoff and landing capability permits operation from airstrips close to the front lines. The B-2 Spirit is here. The B-2 is incredibly impressive, but entered service right at the end and after the Cold War. But I couldn't leave it out. The B-2 is a U.S. Air Force stealth strategic heavy bomber, featuring distinctive tailless flying wing design optimized for low observability against radar, infrared, and other detection methods. It first flew on July 17, 1989, and entered service in 1997, with only 21 aircraft built. The F-117 Nighthawk was the world's first operational stealth aircraft, a single-seat attack jet developed in secrecy by Lockheed's Skunk Works. It was conceived to penetrate heavily defended airspace using radar-evading design and materials, and a distinctive faceted angular shape. It first flew on June 18, 1981, and achieved initial operational capability in October 1983, and was publicly acknowledged only in 1988, with a total of 59 production aircraft built. Here are some other planes in the Cold War gallery. And don't miss the missile gallery. These ICBMs standing tall like a silo. Intense stuff. Visitors can view missiles such as the Titan I and II and Jupiter from ground level, or can take an aerial view from an elevated platform that hugs the inside of the circumference of the gallery. This is a good time to mention some pro tips for your visit. Wear comfortable shoes. You'll be walking a ton. Download the museum app or grab a map at the entrance. Maps require donation. The memorial park outside is peaceful and great for photos. If you have kids, they'll love the hands-on areas and flight simulators, but that's an extra cost. Next, we enter the Space Gallery and the Research and Development Gallery. The Space Gallery showcases the Space Shuttle exhibit, featuring NASA's first crew compartment trainer, a high-fidelity representation of a space shuttle crew station used primarily for on-orbit crew training and engineering evaluations. Visitors are able to look inside the cockpit and mid-deck areas, where astronauts train to do experiments, eat, sleep, and take care of hygiene. You can also walk into a full-sized representation of a NASA Space Shuttle payload bay, with a satellite inside. But now, let's take a look at a real Apollo 15 command module. Command Module Endeavour. Apollo 15 was the fourth successful moon landing mission and the only Apollo mission with an all-Air Force crew, who flew it to the moon in July 1971. Apollo 15 focused mainly on lunar science and was the first mission to use a lunar rover vehicle. The crew spent 4 days traveling to the moon. Then Scott and Irwin landed the lunar module Falcon on the moon's surface. They spent 67 hours exploring and setting up scientific experiments. Project Apollo's main goal was to land astronauts on the moon and return them safely to Earth. Beating the Soviets to the moon in the space race of the 1960s was an important part of the Cold War competition. Here are some artifacts of space exploration and research and development of aerospace vehicles. Okay, Now that we're back from our adventure in outer space, let's hit the last gallery, the Presidential Gallery. We're going to start with the Douglas VC-54C Skymaster, officially the Flying White House, but better known by its nickname, Sacred Cow, a reference to high security surrounding the aircraft and its special status. This is the first aircraft purpose-built to transport the President of the United States. Visitors can walk through it, just like all the others. The aircraft was heavily modified on the assembly line. The unpressurized fuselage was fitted with wings which offered greater fuel capacity. FDR flew on Sacred Cow only once, to the Yalta Conference in 1945. The trip to Yalta was Roosevelt's only flight aboard the aircraft before its untimely death in April 1945. And this cockpit is amazing, so many gauges and controls. An electric refrigerator in the galley added an uncommon luxury for 1945. Roosevelt's successor, Harry S. Truman, used the aircraft extensively during the first 27 months of his administration. On July 26, 1947, President Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947 on board the Sacred Cow. This act, which became effective on September 18, 1947, established the U.S. Air Force as an independent service, making the Sacred Cow the birthplace of the U.S. Air Force. There was an executive conference room with a large desk and a rectangular bulletproof window. For added comfort, a private lavatory was installed next to the president's seat, and a fold-down bed was concealed behind the sofa. A unique battery-powered elevator was installed at the rear of the aircraft, specifically designed so that President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who used a wheelchair due to polio, could board the aircraft easily while in his wheelchair. And here's the Independence. This Douglas VC-118 on display was the second aircraft built specifically to transport the President of the United States. It was the primary presidential aircraft for Harry S. Truman, used from 1947 to 1953. At the suggestion of the aircraft's pilot, President Truman named it the Independence in recognition of his hometown, Independence, Missouri. This plane had a unique bright color scheme, recommended by the Douglas Aircraft Company, consisting of a stylized American eagle with the feathers carried down the fuselage. The Independence was formally commissioned on July 4, 1947. Other improvements: a pressurized cabin, weather radar, autopilot, and more. The engines had more power at takeoff, and larger fuel tanks enabled it to fly non-stop to any location within the continental United States. And President Truman made his first official flight in the aircraft on August 31st to an international conference in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. One of the plane's most historic flights occurred on October 1950, when it carried President Truman to Wake Island to discuss the Korean War situation with General Douglas MacArthur. And here's the aircraft navigational plotter, used to draw and measure courses and distances on aeronautical charts. The Independence had a main cabin which seated 24 passengers or 12 sleeper berths. And it had a kitchen as well. It also included an aft stateroom for the president. In May 1953, after nearly 6 years of White House service, the U.S. Air Force retired the Independence from presidential service. This is the Lockheed VC-121E, also known as Columbine 3. The aircraft on display served as President Dwight D. Eisenhower's primary personal airplane from 1954 until he left office in January 1961. It has a fuselage that stretched 18 feet longer than earlier versions, with more powerful engines, greater fuel capacity, and greater speed. This was also the era when the Air Force One call sign became established. Eisenhower named this aircraft his third Lockheed Super Constellation, Columbine 3, after the official state flower of Colorado, in honor of the First Lady, Mammy Eisenhower. Mrs. Eisenhower formally christened the Columbine 3 on November 24, 1954, with a flask of water from Colorado instead of the traditional bottle of champagne. The plane featured a VIP interior for about 8 crew and 24 passengers. Forward areas included a radio room for communication and teletype, crew seating with tables, and a galley equipped with a stovetop, oven, toaster, and hot and cold water urns. Additional staff seating with tables followed, leading to the presidential stateroom toward the rear, which had a desk and chairs for Eisenhower, a telephone, a 16mm film projector, and 2 couches that converted into beds. The aircraft also included a relatively spacious presidential lavatory, larger than on prior presidential planes, and other amenities such as curtains, lighting, and storage. The aircraft's most important mission took place in July 1955, when it flew Eisenhower and Secretary of State John Foster Dulles to Geneva, Switzerland, for the first peacetime summit between the leaders of the Western democracies and the Soviet leadership. Columbine 3 served as the president's official aircraft for 6 years. The Boeing VC-137C on display was the first jet aircraft specifically built for use by the President of the United States. It's the most historically eventful of all the presidential planes. Entering service in 1962, during its 36 years of service, it carried 8 sitting presidents and other important officials on historic journeys. It's known as a Special Air Missions, or SAM. It served as the primary Air Force One for Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, then continued as a backup and VIP transport into the 1990s, carrying a total of 8 presidents: Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Clinton. Bearing the unique call sign SAM 26000, this aircraft illustrated the Air Force's commitment to providing safe, reliable, and comfortable air transportation for the President and other key personnel to locations anywhere around the globe. Whenever the President was on board the aircraft, the call sign changed to Air Force One, a special designation to avoid confusion with other aircraft in flight. It featured a customized interior with a communications center, galleys, staff seating, conference areas, and a private presidential stateroom that included a desk, couch, television, and bathroom. Its cabin was divided into sections for crew, staff, press, Secret Service, and the President, with capacity for about 40 passengers plus crew, and it included advanced secure communications for worldwide calls. In 1963, SAM 26000 flew President Kennedy to West Berlin, Germany, where he declared to the world that Ich bin ein Berliner, I am a Berliner, boldly assuring continued American support in the face of communist threats and the construction of the Berlin Wall. SAM 26000 bears an intimate connection to one of the nation's greatest tragedies, a moment that forever altered the course of American history. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated while traveling in a motorcade through downtown Dallas, Texas. Hours later, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as the new president aboard SAM 26000. The aircraft then carried Kennedy's body and President Johnson back to Washington, D.C. and a grieving nation. So, that wraps up our look at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. This place is absolutely massive and packed with history. You've got to check it out. What was your favorite part? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. If you want more videos like this, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another adventure. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.